Venezuelan Council of State declared an emergency and permanent session in order to follow the fight against the novel coronavirus pandemic, while the government also called for an end to US sanctions across the globe. For the 15th day in a row, thousands across Brazil have protested from their homes, banging pots and pans against President Jair Bolsonaro. A Chinese medical team has arrived in London to assist the United Kingdom in its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. From the headquarters of Teleso English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. The Venezuelan Council of State declared an emergency and permanent session in order to follow the fight against the novel coronavirus pandemic in the country. During the session, President Nicolas Maduro called on Venezuelan social, political and economic sectors to face the pandemic united and in peace, appealing to the discipline, solidarity and strength of the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelan government categorically rejected the unilateral sanctions of the Trump administration and joined the global call for an end to such illegal measures against nations that today combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Venezuela also demands access to resources it legally owns, which were stolen by the government of the United States through its sanctions policy. Maduro called on all sectors to dialogue to confront the global pandemic together. He also reported that 8 new coronavirus cases were detected in Venezuela for a total of 143. And the Venezuelan government this Tuesday rejected a new interventionist plan hatched by the US State Department, which insists on the imposition of a transitional government in the South American nation. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo presented a so-called framework for a peaceful democratic transition in Venezuela, which once again calls for a transitional government in complete disregard of the already existing legitimate and democratically elected government of President Nicolas Maduro. Pompeo stressed that US sanctions against Venezuela will remain in effect and increase until such demands are met. In response, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza condemned the latest move and underlined that Venezuela is a sovereign country that makes its own decisions without foreign interference. The latest State Department plan comes after years of failed attempts by the US and a minority extremist sector of the Venezuelan opposition to topple the Maduro government. And the Venezuelan Foreign Minister reiterated that President Nicolas Maduro was democratically elected in 2018.
President Maduro was elected in the year 2018 for a period of 6 years. The only form recognized in the Constitution would be if the Venezuelan opposition were to activate a recall referendum once he completes half of his term. He will never betray the trust that the people placed in him on 2 occasions already, and his duty and obligation is to carry on as the Constitution indicates.
And Arreaza warned that through the multiple attacks on Venezuela, the United States intends to seize the country's oil resources.
President Trump and his administration have an obsession with accomplishing their will here and resuming control over Venezuelan oil, Venezuelan resources, resuming their grip on power in Venezuela, which was in their hands until the year 1999. But we do what the Venezuelan people say, not what President Trump says. If one day they decide to respect Venezuela, we will welcome that respect. We will respect them as we should and establish the best relations. Until then, the relations are of tension, of defense of our sovereignty and anti-imperialism, as it should be.
And Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez condemned the latest US plan against Venezuela and described it as another criminal move that threatens the peace and stability of the Americas. On his Twitter account, the Cuban Foreign Minister rejected the new plan for Venezuela presented by US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, stressing that it only confirms US neo-colonial intent in line with the Monroe Doctrine. He added that US sanctions must be lifted without any precondition whatsoever. Justice of the Supreme Federal Court of Brazil, Marco Aurelio Melo, accepted a criminal complaint calling for the suspension of President Jair Bolsonaro from the post for 180 days. The justice forwarded the request to the Brazilian Prosecutor's General Office after considering that the head of state has undertaken several actions that favour the spread of the novel coronavirus and put the country at risk. Mello ruled that the Prosecutor General's office should analyse a report on criminal offences presented against President Bolsonaro. The decision was made last Friday, but wasn't made public until this Tuesday. The latest ruling joins other initiatives presented by several Workers' Party parliamentarians, also calling for Bolsonaro's suspension. Should the prosecutor's office decide the complaint has merit to open an investigation, it will be passed to the Chamber of Deputies. And in a live national broadcast this Tuesday evening, on what marked the anniversary of the Brazilian military coup of 1964, President Jair Bolsonaro called for a pact between all powers in the country. He also took credit for a payment of $120 for informal workers that was approved by the Congress and that he had been reluctant to accept. Bolsonaro quoted the Director General of the World Health Organization in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. It should be noted that on Tuesday morning, Bolsonaro misquoted the WHO Director General in order to justify his rejection of social isolation. He also said that the contraindications of the fight against the coronavirus could not be worse than the virus itself, and thus called on people to continue working. In response, Brazilians across the country conducted the largest demonstration of people banging pots and pans from their windows and balconies to denounce Bolsonaro after 2 weeks of uninterrupted daily protests. On this occasion, the Brazilian population not only expressed condemnation of Bolsonaro's handling of the novel coronavirus pandemic, but also of his publicly declared admiration for the military dictatorship. Messages projected on buildings in Sao Paulo as part of the protest read, "To idolize torture is to repeat the mistakes of the past." The Dominican Republic has been under a nationwide curfew from 5 p.m. to 6 a.m. for the past 11 days to attempt to stem the spread of the COVID-19 virus. The country has reported over 1,000 cases and over 50 fatalities. Our correspondent Daisy Toussaint brings us the latest on the situation there.
Greetings to you in the studio and to all our viewers. Well, 11 days after the implementation of the curfew in the Dominican Republic, and according to the National Police report this Tuesday, more than 19,000 people have been detained for non-compliance with the measures imposed by the government on March 20 to prevent the spread of the coronavirus in the country. The Dominican Medical College and 55 medical specialty societies requested that the President of the Republic urgently declare the country in a state of total mandatory quarantine for at least 14 days. Later, fake news circulated that the government was about to approve that measure today, Tuesday, which sparked alarm and saw people rush out yesterday morning, crowding markets and banks from the early morning, which led the Minister of the Presidency to make a statement denying that the government was to establish the total quarantine and stressing that those spreading false news with the aim of creating panic in the population will be brought to justice. In the press release number 12 offered today by the Ministry of Public Health, it was confirmed that the number of coronavirus cases in the country had risen to 1,109 and 51 people have died. The health minister said that of the confirmed cases, 127 are in hospital isolation, 926 are isolated in their homes, and 5 have recovered and been discharged from hospital. Meanwhile, despite the health crisis that the country is facing, the presidential elections are planned for May 17th. In fact, the Central Electoral Board delivered the electoral calendar yesterday to political parties, and from today the preparations are beginning with the delivery of the preliminary electoral register. This is all the information we have for the moment. Back to you in the studio.
Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, has announced additional measures to contain the anticipated spike in novel coronavirus cases, including an island-wide curfew starting on April 1st. Jamaica has confirmed 36 COVID-19 cases and 1 death so far.
Having gone 20 days since our first case, and having seen that our increase relative to other countries of similar size has been relatively low, we are expecting that there will be a rise, in fact a significant rise, in the number of infections that have been confirmed. Having regard to that, the Cabinet carefully considered weighing the economic impact of these measures, but we decided, as we have always done, that the public health is of greater importance. And therefore, I'm announcing today that effective 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. for 7 days, starting on April the 1st, there will be an all-island curfew.
Colombia's Truth Commission this Tuesday condemned the recent attacks against social leaders in several areas of Colombia. The body denounced that during the coronavirus lockdown, armed groups have intimidated social leaders and residents in areas of the departments of Caldas, Risaralda, Quindío and Antioquia. Authorities of the Caña Momo Loma Prieta indigenous reservation reported fires in 3 community mills which they claim were started by hooded individuals. In addition, the United Nations Secretary General expressed the priority of adopting all necessary measures to put an end to the murders of social leaders, human rights defenders and former guerrilla fighters in Colombia. The Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights has received 56 reports of assassinations of social leaders and human rights defenders in Colombia this year, 6 of which were verified, including the murders of 2 women. Today saw the conclusion of an online film festival dedicated to films directed by women. The Mujeres de Cine Festival was organised online in the context of the novel coronavirus pandemic. It was conceived as a space to recognise women directors and highlight their contribution to film. Costa Rica, Chile, Spain, Mexico and Portugal were the countries that participated in this first edition of the festival, offering another means of entertainment for those on lockdown across the world. More stories coming up after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. A Chinese medical team arrived in London to assist the United Kingdom in its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The 15-member team from East China's Shandong province includes 6 medical experts specialising in disease prevention and control, traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine, as well as psychological counselling. The team brought medical supplies which will be donated to local hospitals and Chinese communities. According to Chinese diplomats, they will also provide health consultancy to Chinese communities in the UK, including meeting with business representatives and students in a bid to help Chinese nationals stay safe during the pandemic. Britain's Cabinet Minister Michael Gove said on Tuesday that the UK government was finding it hard to secure supplies of specific chemicals to make sure the COVID-19 tests are reliable, as the government's testing strategy came under attack. Speaking at a daily coronavirus briefing, Gove said the government must go further and faster in rolling out coronavirus tests for healthcare workers and others. There has been widespread criticism of a lack of tests for National Health Service workers exposed to the virus. Gove also said more than 8,000 ventilators would be deployed to hospitals, but government officials confirmed that only 30 new UK-manufactured ventilators would arrive this weekend, and the country still needs more. The Cabinet Minister stressed there were some signs social distancing was flattening the curve of the virus, but warned that now was not the time to start relaxing the restrictions. The UK has been in lockdown for more than a week, with people only allowed to leave their homes to buy food, exercise, or go to work in essential sectors.
143,186 people have now been tested for the virus. Of those, 25,150 have tested positive. And sadly, yesterday we recorded the highest single increase in the number of deaths as a result of COVID-19. 381 people died, meaning that of those hospitalised in the UK, the number who have passed away now totals 1,789.
China will start reporting on asymptomatic coronavirus cases that have been confirmed in the mainland from April 1st, an official from the National Health Commission stated on Tuesday. All asymptomatic virus cases will be centrally quarantined for 14 days. The existence of a substantial but unknown number of coronavirus carriers displaying no symptoms has raised concerns among the Chinese public that people could still be spreading the virus without knowing they are sick.
There are currently 2,161 confirmed cases, including 528 critical cases and 183 suspected cases. The overall confirmed cases on the mainland had reached 81,518. 76,052 patients had been discharged after recovery, and 3,305 people died of the disease.
The COVID-19 death rate in Germany, currently 4%, will increase in the coming days according to the Robert Koch Institute. According to the president of the institute responsible for disease control and prevention, the low number of victims in Germany is thanks to the fact that the disease was identified at a very early moment and many samples were examined. 500,000 COVID-19 tests are being carried out per week in Germany. According to the official, there is no country in the world that has as many places in intensive care for artificial respiration as in Germany, although this is not enough to contain the epidemic. In addition, the president of the institute detailed that out of the 61,013 positive cases registered electronically, there have been 583 fatalities so far, while 16,000 people have recovered from the COVID-19 virus. Italian Health Minister Roberto Speranza announced the national lockdown to contain the novel coronavirus epidemic will be extended at least until Easter. The government's scientific advisors have recommended the extension of all containment measures until at least April 12th, as the nation's death toll climbed to 11,000, according to the Civil Protection Agency. Italy now has more than 100,000 positive COVID-19 cases, although the infection rate slowed over the past 24 hours. Of those originally infected nationwide, more than 14,000 had fully recovered by Monday. A WHO senior official has warned that lockdowns and stringent measures in place for the past 2 weeks should lead soon to a stabilisation of the coronavirus epidemic, but vigilant follow-up will be required. Meanwhile, Spain has reported more than 400 COVID-19 fatalities for 4 days in a row. However, the increase in percentage terms was slightly lower than in previous days, according to the Health Ministry. The death toll rose to over 8,000 on Tuesday, while the number of cases rose to 94,000. Likewise, France reported its highest daily number of fatalities since the coronavirus epidemic began, bringing the death toll to 3,000. In the meantime, France announced it would pay for hotel rooms for victims of domestic violence and open pop-up counselling centres after figures showed the number of abuse cases had soared during the first week of the lockdown to curb the spread of the coronavirus. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back. Europe has delivered medical supplies to Iran for the first time using the Instex barter mechanism, which allows it to bypass the illegal US sanctions against Iran. France, Germany and the United Kingdom confirmed that Instex had successfully concluded its first transaction, facilitating the export of medical goods from Europe to Iran. These goods are now in Iran, the German Foreign Ministry said in a statement on Tuesday. The ministry also noted that Instex will be used in other transactions with Iran and the mechanism will continue to be developed. The first successful transaction comes more than a year after the UK, France and Germany, signatories to the nuclear deal signed between Iran and world powers in 2015, announced the creation of Instex as a means to evade US sanctions. The Iranian government stressed it would never forget its friends in difficult times. Iran has been hard hit by the novel coronavirus pandemic, with 44,600 confirmed cases, of whom almost 3,000 have lost their lives. Meanwhile, Iranian authorities announced that the country has deployed the necessary resources to establish emergency hospitals in the midst of the novel coronavirus pandemic. Over the last 48 hours, the Iranian army has set up an emergency hospital to treat COVID-19 patients. So far, the country has installed 3 intensive care units and several isolation units to take care of the new cases. Meanwhile, Iran expects to build more health facilities to battle the virus, despite the limitations it suffers due to the US sanctions. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is under growing pressure from trade unions and the opposition to announce a lockdown to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus. Ankara has suspended all international flights, limited domestic travel, closed schools, bars and cafes, suspended mass prayers and sports fixtures to counter the outbreak. However, authorities have not ordered people to stay at home, even as the number of cases in Turkey has risen sharply. Erdogan insists that Turkey should keep its wheels turning and that people should continue going to work. On Monday, the number of COVID-19 cases reached 10,000, less than 3 weeks since Turkey registered its first case. Meanwhile, the death toll jumped to almost 170, drawing fresh calls for tighter measures. With Turkey emerging from a recession triggered by a 2018 currency crisis, Erdogan is committed to ensuring the recovery and refusing to enforce a stay-at-home order that would halt economic activity, calling simply for voluntary self-isolation. Sierra Leone confirmed the country's first case of COVID-19 on Tuesday. Sierra Leone becomes the 48th African country to report a case and the last in West Africa to do so. A raft of measures have already been imposed to prevent the entry and subsequent spread of the virus, including the indefinite closure of schools and other educational institutions throughout the country. The government closed all borders last week after its neighbours Guinea and Liberia did the same. Meanwhile, neighbouring Guinea also announced a 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew throughout the country to stem the spread of the novel coronavirus. President Alpha Condé also isolated the capital, Conakry, with no travel allowed to and from the rest of the country. This decision came after the country's COVID-19 cases doubled to 22.
Press conference today to announce that Sierra Leone has registered its index case. Case number 1 is imported. I repeat, case number 1 is imported. He is a male, 37 years old, and came to Sierra Leone from France on Air Brussels flight on the 16th of March 2020.
And we end this news brief on a lighter note. 56 years ago today, American singer-songwriter Tracy Chapman was born in Cleveland, Ohio. Known for her hits Fast Car and Talking About a Revolution, she is a multi-platinum and 4-time Grammy Award-winning artist. Chapman began playing the guitar and writing songs at the age of 8. She is a politically and socially active musician who has performed at numerous socially aware events and continues to do so. In 1988, she performed in London as part of a world tour to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That same year, Chapman also performed at the Nelson Mandela 70th Birthday Tribute, an event which raised money for South Africa's anti-apartheid movement and 7 children's charities. And we remind you that you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telly English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.
While they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know they're talking about a revolution? It sounds like a whisper. Poor people gonna rise up and get their share. Poor people gonna rise up and take what's theirs. Don't you know you better run, 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 run. Oh, I said you better run, 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 run. 'Cause finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a